Okay, we're going to start back with PR26-4A. And we completed step 1 in the first video. We calculated our overhead rate for our 5 activities that drive our overhead cost. And then we're going to allocate those costs to our different products, M5, Z4, and I8, using these rates and activity levels. So we'll start with M5. On production, our activity base is machine hours. For M5, machine hours were 1,000. Okay, the rate for machine hours, $120. Then we're just going to multiply these two. 1,000 machine hours for M5 times the $120 rate. $120,000. Now I could go across here and do this for all 3 products on machine hours and production cost as I'm going if I want, or I could complete M5 and go on to Z4. I think I'll just go on and do the production as I'm going. Machine hours used on Z4 were 800. The rate remains the same at 120. Then we'll multiply those two together. 800 times 120. And notice Z4 gets less of the production generated overhead cost than M5 because they used less machine hours to produce Z4. The activity base on I8 was 400 machine hours, so it'll definitely get the least amount of the production generated overhead cost. Activity rate is still the 120. So we're going to say 400 machine hours times our rate of $120 per machine hour gets us to 48,000. By a long shot, it got the least amount of the production generated overhead cost. But it also had what? The least amount of machine hours, right? The one with the most machine hours got the greatest amount of the cost. That's how it works with activity-based costing, you guys. Now you see how we're going to finish it on out. 60 setups for M5. The setups rate is $240 per setup. So then we'll multiply it out. 60 times the 240. We get 14,400. On Z4, the number of setups is 120. The rate is 240 again. Then we'll multiply them out. We get 28,800. Then for I8, at 220 setups, at the $240 rate per setup, we'll multiply that out. And notice they had the greatest number of setups, so they're going to get the majority of the setup overhead cost. 52,800 compared to 28,800 for Z4, 14,400 for M5. Much better than just dividing the number by 3. But dividing the number by 3 by activities, well, it still really doesn't help. It'd be the same as dividing the total number by 3. If you separate it out or allocate the cost based on some type of activity level, it's just much more accurate. You get a better feel for what that product actually costs to produce per unit, and then that allows you to set a more advantageous sales price Plays into all facets of the business, really. Okay, materials handling. We're going to allocate that cost based on the number of parts. Well, the number of parts for M5 is 80. Our rate there is $20 per part. So then we're going to multiply 80 times 20. We get 1,600. For Z4, the number of parts, 150. Our rate, still 20. So we're going to multiply it out. 150 times 20. $3,000. Then for I8, the number of parts, 250. 20 per part. And that equals 250 times the 20. And that gets us 5,000. All right, a couple more to wrap up here. Inspections, we're going to allocate that out based on the number of inspection hours. Number of inspection hours spent on M5. 450. The rate per inspection hour is $50. So it equals 450 times 50, 22,500. The number of inspection hours for Z4 is 300. Times $50 per inspection hour. And this one's going to be equal to 300 inspection hours times our rate of $50 per hour, or per inspection hour. Gets us 15,000 of the cost allocated to Z4 for inspections. And then the number of inspection hours on I8, only 250. So it'll get the least amount of the cost because it had the least amount of the inspection hours at 50 per hour. And that equals 250 times 50, 12,500. Notice it's the least of the three because what? The number of inspection hours, 250, was less than the 300 for Z4 or the 450 for M5. Pardon me. On engineering, we're going to allocate that cost based on the number of engineering hours. Number of engineering hours spent on M5, 125 at 300 per hour. It's like the engineer is more valuable than the inspector. At least the company thinks so. Alright, then we're going to multiply it out. Could point to an engineer being a great thing to be, probably. Be very interesting, I'm sure. 37,500 of the engineering cost is allocated to product M5. How many engineering hours were spent on Z4? That's 175. That's equal to 300 per hour. So that equals 175 times the 300 per hour. 52,500. Then for I8, 200 engineering hours at 300 per hour. And that's equal to 200 engineering hours times 300 per hour, 60,000. Got the most of the engineering cost, or most of the engineering cost was assigned to I8 because they had 200 engineering hours compared to 175 for Z4 and only 125 for M5. So you can see how this goes, you guys. The more of an activity that the particular product line consumes, the more of the overhead costs generated by that activity, the more overhead costs generated by that activity is assigned to that particular product. We'll try to say that one more time. In producing a particular product, let's say M5, the more of a particular activity that it incurs in production, the more overhead cost is allocated to that particular product. The less activity it generates, the less of that particular type of overhead is allocated to that product. So we're allocating overhead based on what we think is causing the overhead, rather than just divide by 3 method, which would not be nearly as accurate here. Now we want to add these together. We get 196,000 here. $195,300 here. We come out to 178,300 here. So what would have happened, you guys, had we just divided by 3? We would have allocated more overhead costs to product I8 than we should have, and we would have made it look less profitable than it actually was. All right, now we're going to divide this number by the total number of units of each product that we produced. We'll divide M5 by the number of units of M5 produced, 1,250, and that equals 196,000. divided by 1,250. $156.80 is the overhead cost per unit allocated to M5. Okay, then we produced how many Z4s? 1,000. So it's going to be equal to $195,300 divided by 1,000. You get $195.30 of overhead allocated to each unit of Z4. And then for I8, produced 500 units. So it's the 178,300 divided by 500 units. Overhead cost per unit allocated to I8, even though total overhead allocated to I8 was the least of the three, the per unit overhead cost allocated to I8 is the greatest of the three because it's spread over fewer units. Only 500 units here, 1,000 here, and 1,250 units to spread the cost over here. The more units you have the more units of a product you produce, the less the cost per unit in overhead, right? Because a lot of those overhead costs are fixed. Okay. Now number 3 says, why aren't the activity unit costs equal across all 3 products since they all require the same machine time per unit? Well, they're not equal because their consumption levels are unequal. We've talked about that all the way through. Okay, you guys, like I mentioned before, the reason these numbers are different, these total numbers, is because the activity levels are different, right? And we're allocating this overhead based on activity. So I thought for number 3, I'd give you the book's answer. So let's read through it together. The unit costs are different even though each product requires 0.8 machine hours because the products consume many activities and ratios different from the volume. Meaning you can't say that because M5, because we produced more units of M5, then M5 is going to have more engineering hours. Well, that's just not true. We produced the most units of M5, but it had the least number of engineering hours involved. Okay, so that's what they mean by the products consume many activities and ratios different from the volume. For example, I-8 consumes setup, moving, shipping, and product engineering activities proportionally greater than its volume. The engineering are the ones I pointed to. While M5 consumes the same activities proportionately less than its volume. Okay, you guys, practice that one for the final. And if you have any questions, please be in touch. I think after working this one with me, you won't have any trouble with your homework problem, and that's PR 26-4B. If you have any questions, please be in touch. Thanks a lot.